These large animals were some of the biggest on Tatooine, but as a wise Jedi once said, there's always a bigger fish, and all 4 of these beasts of burden were preyed upon by Tatooine's largest predators. These included the sandbats, a species of flying, leathery-winged pack hunters who traveled in large groups. Sandbat venom was deadly to humans and caused excruciating pain, and sand people often used it to poison the spikes on their gaffy sticks. There were also skicks, a rare species of large, vicious predatory lizards that stalked the remote wastes of Tatooine, and the raid, a species of burly reptilian predators that could be found in the deserts south of Anchorhead. Tatooine raid came in several subspecies, including ordinary desert raid, tougher Hulak raid, and the rare, fearsome dune claws. All of these subspecies had large heads, sharp teeth and claws, and highly muscular front legs, as well as much smaller rear legs. They traveled in packs of 2 to 6 and could be ferocious foes, bounding toward predators and prey alike to attack with their long front claws. Raid were once common in the southern Dune Sea, preying on the Banthas and dewbacks that lived there, but their numbers were greatly reduced by hunters, as raid were popular targets for less experienced trophy hunters due to the dense bone plates in their heads, which had niche medical uses and were thus very valuable. Perhaps the most infamous of Tatooine's predators was the fearsome Krayt dragon, a reptomammal that was one of the largest creatures on the planet. These monsters came in 2 subspecies, the smaller and more common canyon Krayt dragon and the more elusive greater Krayt dragon. Canyon Krayts lived in the highlands and were about 30 meters long, with 4 legs, long forked tails, and sharp horns, teeth, and claws, the latter of which could rend durasteel. They were covered in blast-resistant scales, and there was only a single weak point in their armor, the dragon's sinus cavity. Greater Krayts, meanwhile, could grow up to 100 meters long, and they needed 10 to 16 legs to support their enormous bulk. These monsters lived out in the open desert and swam under the sands of the Dune Sea, though, like the canyon Krayt, they used large cave systems in the highlands as their lairs. Both varieties of Krayt dragon preyed primarily on banthas, but also on other large beasts, and they both swallowed boulders to store in their gizzards to grind down food. The dragon's stomach acid refined these boulders into Krayt dragon pearls, one of the most priceless treasures in the galaxy. The only predator on Tatooine that hunted these mighty beasts was the even rarer sand demon, a species of 6-legged, clawed insect with incredibly thick exoskeletons and a fearsome temper. Like greater Krayts, sand demons swam through the sands of the Dune Sea, and they preyed on most of Tatooine's fauna, including canyon Krayts. The sarlacc that dwelled in the Great Pit of Carkoon, which wasn't native to Tatooine but was well established in the ecosystem of the northern Dune Sea, also occasionally ate canyon Krayts. Neither sand demons nor sarlaccs could challenge the greater Krayt dragon, however, which was even known to prey upon sarlaccs from time to time. Now it's time to move on to Tatooine's intelligent lifeforms, beginning with the more fearsome of its 2 indigenous sentient species, the Sand People. The Sand People, along with their planetary neighbors, the Jawas, were the descendants of the ancient Kumamga, the original indigenous sentients of Tatooine. Most of the Kumamga were killed when the Rakata razed the planet, but a few populations survived in strongholds deep underground. By the time their distant descendants emerged from their caves, they diverged into 2 species, the Jawas and the Gorfas, the latter of whom later became known as the Sand People. Following their emergence from the caves, the Gorfas, as they were then known, became a nomadic people, spending the next thousands of years roaming the habitable region, coming to terms with their new identity and their new desert homeworld. The Sand People referred to this part of their history as the Long Walk, and it ultimately ended with the Gorfas diverging into tribes before settling down and forming sedentary societies, which settled primarily in caves that contained reliable aquifers. but the arrival of the first of Tatooine's settlers upended the Gorfers' way of life, cutting off their water sources and uprooting their tribes. The Gorfers became nomadic once more, and between 5000 and 4000 BBY, their society made up its final transformation into the Sand People culture we know from the modern era. Around the time of the films, these people were known primarily by two names, the Sand People and the Tusken Raiders. It's sometimes assumed that the name Sand People was an insult applied by the settlers while they were properly known as the Tuskens, but it's actually the other way round. The name Tusken Raiders refers to a settler outpost the Sand People destroyed, while the name Sand People was fairly close to how these beings thought of themselves as people of the desert who lived in harmony with the sands of their home. The name the Sand People called themselves is unknown, while the Jawas called them horned ghosts or the giants of the sand. We've stuck to calling them the Sand People thus far, and we're going to keep doing so going forward. The Sand People were humanoids, and biologically speaking, they were very similar to humans. Indeed, one of the reasons they hated the human settlers so much was because they believed the humans looked like the ancient Kumamga, and this resemblance reminded the Sand People of their ancestors' ancient sins. With that said, Sand People and humans weren't genetically compatible, so there were at least some biological differences between the two. The specifics of Sand People biology were largely unknown, however. In Sand People culture, it was forbidden to expose any part of the flesh, and as a result, just their basic physical appearance was a mystery. Nonetheless, in most respects, the Sand People had very similar capabilities to humans, though they were a little tougher and had a higher tolerance for heat and hardship. The Sand People lived in nomadic tribes and clans which wandered the deserts and uplands of Tatooine's habitable region. They were somewhat xenophobic, with a fierce hatred of the planet's settlers and even the Jawas. Despite this, the Sand People were known to adopt outsiders into their tribes. A number of Sand People were actually humans taken in raids as children who were raised in the customs of the Sand People. The language of the Sand People was guttural and had an animalistic sound, but it was deceptively complex and difficult for most non-Sand People to understand or master. It had no corresponding written language. Tatooine's planetary government estimated that Sand People made up 5% of the planet's population of 200,000, which would mean there were only about 10,000 Sand People on the entire planet. This estimate was likely a major undercount, as most Sand People's tribes roamed the remote fringes of the habitable region, far from the settlers' towns. The specific customs of the Sand People varied from tribe to tribe, but they were all based on one shared culture and way of life. All of the Sand People tribes were nomadic, and their migrations took them all across Tatooine's habitable region. Each tribe followed its own specific migration patterns, which usually wound through the Dune Sea between upland regions. Many Sand People tribes had migration patterns that led through the Junlan wastes. During sandstorm season, large numbers of tribes would camp in the wastes, particularly in the southern subregion known as the Needles. Some Sand People tribes roamed through Tatooine's settled lands, where they routinely came into conflict with the settlers. Others kept to the shifting sands of the Dune Sea, living far from the settlers and avoiding them whenever possible. Sand People tribes occasionally battled over territory or banded together under powerful warlords, but this was uncommon. The Sand People were hunter-gatherers, with most tribes subsisting primarily on water from oases and underground aquifers. Habagords gathered from rock crags in the upland regions and the meat of large animals their warriors hunted. The hunting grounds and their water reservoirs of some tribes were stolen or destroyed by the settlers, however, and these tribes compensated for their losses by raiding settlements and moisture farms, taking food, beasts of burden, and stores of water, as well as prisoners and other trophies. Though the Sand People hated many kinds of advanced technology for reasons we'll discuss shortly, some tribes also made use of moisture evaporators to make up for the loss of natural aquifers. Sand People hunted not only for sport, but for honor. young warriors prove themselves by hunting Tatooine's most dangerous beasts, or by hunting settlers, the most dangerous beasts of all. The Sand People killed or captured dewbacks, raid, and settlers for various rituals and traditions, the most gruesome of which was the blood rite, in which a young warrior would torture their prey to death over the course of weeks. The greatest of Sand People warriors strive to slay Krayt dragons, the mightiest of Tatooine's predators, and retrieve Krayt dragon pearls from their gizzards. This was rarely accomplished, and the Sand People generally feared Krayt dragons and avoided them when not in the hunt. The warrior responsible was hailed as being among the tribe's greatest. Sand People clans were usually on the small side, consisting of 20 to 30 individuals, while tribes were larger. Sand People tribes were typically led by a chieftain or war chief, usually the strongest warrior of the tribe. Every tribe also contained a single storyteller, the keeper of the tribe's legends, rituals, and oral history. Tribes typically lived in temporary mobile camps, living in tents made of sticks and hides, though some tribes lived in larger, semi-permanent fortified enclaves. In some tribes, male and female Sand People had different roles in the tribe, with males being hunters and warriors, and females tending to the camp and taking care of the children. Other Sand People tribes, and many of the smaller clans, didn't have these roles, and both males and females did a bit of both. In any case, the hunters and warriors often roamed abroad for long periods of time, and as a result, those who remained at camp had to know how to fend for themselves, making all Sand People capable warriors. Sand People children, known as Ulia in their language, were considered genderless until they came of age at 15. At all times, all Sand People wore tan-colored desert wrappings which left no skin exposed. These kept the wearers cool in the desert heat and also doubled as camouflage. The Sand People considered them sacred. Sand People often wore additional belts, bandoliers, and/or backpacks over their tunics to carry supplies, and their head wrappings incorporated goggles and face masks, the former to protect their eyes from the harsh glare of the suns, and the latter to filter sand out of the air they breathed. Ornamental horns were often incorporated into their head wrappings as well, while moisture traps worn around the neck humidified the air taken in through their masks. In some tribes, female Sand People dressed somewhat differently, incorporating large, ornate metal masks and more refined decorative cloaks into their attire, sometimes ornamented with scraps of metal or the tusks of womp rats. Sand People children wore unisex outfits that incorporated aspects of both male and female dress. For all Sand People, removing these wrappings was forbidden, except under very specific circumstances. Showing even the slightest bit of skin was punished in most tribes with exile or even death, as it was considered a disgrace to the entire tribe. Sand People could only remove their wrappings in the privacy of their own tents, and only when alone. The only times they were allowed to remove their wrappings in front of others was during childbirth, during coming of age rituals, on their wedding nights, and when alone with their mates. The Sand People domesticated several kinds of animals. Dog-like anubas and mastiffs were domesticated for use as guard animals in their camps, where they would assist the women of the tribe in defense against attackers. Most famously, however, the Sand People also domesticated banthas, which they used as mounts or beasts of burden and viewed as sacred animals. At the age of 7, each member of the tribe would be paired with a bantha of the same age, and the two would become companions for life. Banthas were even involved in Sand People marriage ceremonies, which involved blood rituals undertaken by the bride, the groom, and their banthas. When Sand People couples sought to have children, their banthas would mate as well, and the resultant calf would often be the same sex as the couple's child. The Sand People used their banthas as mounts and beasts of burden, riding them single file into battle or on their nomadic wanderings, and they developed close bonds with their banthas, such that banthas would often kill themselves if their riders were slain.